How you doing? Now we've got this whole stack of books here. Hi, big sleepyhead. Yeah, someone hasn't been feeling too well lately because he decided to eat something off the ground. But welcome, everyone. Hope y'all are having a wonderful day. So, for today's video, we are diving into a new deep dive series. And it'll probably come with like our second episode of the Hollywood versus reality or whatever I named it. Oh, Bubba's. He brought me his ball. Introducing our next series, we are diving into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I know this one is probably out of the interest of a lot of people just because of the nature of the Texas Chainsaw movies, but I do think there's a lot of depth to them that a lot of people might not consider. I mean, it really was like, other than Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho or even like Peeping Tom, this was like the first real slasher, and it created the formula for slasher films that even to this day we pretty much still stick to it. It gets spiced up every now and then, but pretty much the craze of slasher films was kind of started by Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween, of course. So in this one, we are going to be diving into the first 3 films, and then we'll dive into it more as we go. There are 9 movies in this franchise, so buckle on up. It's going to be this over like probably the next few weeks, sprinkled with other stuff here and there. But yeah, so some literature that I kind of bounced between for this was Men, Women, and Chainsaws. It's Gender in the Modern Horror Film by Carol J. Clover. This is one of the most like foundational horror psychology texts, even though it wasn't written until I believe like the 80s. But this, and I would say Barbara Creed, of course, and Julia Kristeva really dive into more of the like themes of modern day horror. So that's why I like reflecting on it. But this one directly references mostly the first 2 Texas Chainsaw films. After that, it just kind of like goes crazy. I mean, I would say that any of these books you could reference while watching these films. I think mostly what this movie tends to focus on is like economic issues of the time, and also like there's a bit of ableism and ageism as well as classism, and I think it tries to subtly nitpick at some of those things in a good way. But yeah, we're going to dive into it. Like I said, we're going to go through the first 3 films. So the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. Now, the titles do change a bit throughout the franchise. I don't know if it's a copyright thing. It might be. But chainsaw is 2 words in the first movie. The second movie, it's 1 word. In the third one, it's 1 word. And then as we go, we'll talk about it. But it does change. So, first film, directed by Tobe Hooper and was co-written with Kim Henkel. It was also independently produced. Kind of shows, but like in a good way, I think. The budget was $80,000 to $140,000. That's about $700,000 with inflation, so relatively low budget for a film. I feel like a horror movie, it's probably on par. But box office, it received $30.9 million, probably grossed a whole hell of a lot more since. And it was distributed by Bryanston Distributing Company. So, the quick little rundown of the very first movie. A group of youngsters come across a family of psychopaths who attack them with a variety of gruesome methods, including a chainsaw, before those who survive escape, still pursued by the saw-wielding Leatherface. Now, there's a lot of like kind of behind the scenes notes on this movie. It's very well documented. I believe there's even a documentary on it. How like grueling and terrible the experience was for everyone on set, how hot it was. And I believe it was a month straight of filming in like the middle of summer in Texas. It sounds terrible. Rotting meat all around, like, dog. They really did something, but oh my. I also do think it is important to note that what Texas Chainsaw was and what it became are two completely different things. They're still all made in the same breath, I would say, but it's not until later on that you start to see like actual portrayal of violence and gore. Before then, in the first movie, you don't see anything. You don't see anything. You know, you probably remember it being a gore fest. It's kind of not. I mean, there is some, but it's not like how you remember it being from your childhood, you know? Because I watched this one at a very young age. And I remember it being something different than it really was. And I think that's just kind of the legacy of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. But there isn't a lot of direct portrayal of violence within the film. Not like the later movies in the franchise, you know? So I just think that's interesting. There's a lot of implied gore or implied violence, but you don't see anything directly, you know? Like, you never see a meat hook going into anyone. You see that later down the line. It becomes very blatant that it's just gore porn. And we can cover that too, because that is talked about in these books as well. So we can get into it. But let's get into the cast. So the main role of Sally Hardesty is played by Marilyn Burns. Gunnar Hansen is Leatherface. Edwin Neal is the hitchhiker. Terry McMinn is Pam. Paul A. Partain is Franklin Hardesty. Jim Sidow is Drayton Sawyer. William Vervave is Kirk. And John Larroquette is the narrator. They do have narrators in some of the movies, not all of them. Alrighty, so I guess diving right into it, and it kind of goes into like the soundtrack as well. I do have the soundtrack on vinyl. I believe these are the only two films that have vinyl soundtracks. It's the first one and then the second one. To be fair though, those are my favorites. So actually, there might be new contenders for favorites in the series, because now that I've actually sat down and watched all of them, there are some that I was like, ooh, okay, they really ate here. So, the opening intro, kind of infamous, kind of iconic. It really gives that sense of reality. Like, the voice and just the way that it's set up, it feels like we're about to see an expose on something.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths.
The flashing light and just the noise. It's so well done because it's so disturbing and freaking creepy. But the flashing scenes of like corpses, the dirty and grimy, just nature of the film, it's right out the gate, just like pure grade A exploitation. That's something that like I feel like we don't see a lot nowadays. I feel like it's harder to pull off in a correct way. Like, there's some exploitation films that I just don't feel comfortable with, and then there's some that I do. So I don't know, maybe it's just entirely personal choice. Fair. I mean, I do like Cannibal Holocaust, and then there's other movies that like I can't stand. So I guess it's to each their own, but this falls under the category of exploitation film. I mean, the shots of like defiled corpses and whatnot.
Officers there discovered what appeared to be a grisly work of art. The remains of a badly decomposed body wired to a large monument.
I mean, corpse corpses. They're not real. But for the time, this was probably extremely disturbing and extremely realistic special effects. So I can imagine for the 70s, this would probably be a harder film. Because up until that point, I would say, there's so many like socio-political things about the 70s that really influence this movie. And they kind of give that to you right in the opening title sequence. You hear about famine and just rise in crime.
Oil storage units continue to burn out of control at the huge Texaco refinery near the Texas-Louisiana border.
It's kind of like the American nightmare that we're all living. I believe at the time, too, there was a gas shortage. So, in the early hours of August 18th, 1973, a grave robber steals several corpses from a cemetery near New Muerto County, Texas. The robber ties a rotting corpse and other body parts onto a monument, creating a grisly display that is discovered by local residents as the sun rises. And after that is when you get the intro credits, news reports of foodborne illnesses, death, murder, corruption, and that all continues in the background of the first few minutes with the characters because they're listening to the radio in the van. So it's like that constant just feeding of negative information, even when you're not even thinking about it. Like, they're carrying on with their conversation, but if you tune into what's being talked about in the background, it's very serious stuff. I feel like the sentiment of the characters in this movie very much kind of reflects society nowadays. So I find it interesting. I think this is a very good series to dive into right now because it brings up a lot of issues that we're still having to this day. But I really read it as like the troubles of their time staying in the back of their minds at all times. And that's very much how it is now. It's a constant onslaught of media information of bad things. So, driving in a van, 5 teenagers take a road trip through the area. Sally Hardesty, Jerry, Pam, Kirk, and Sally's paraplegic brother, Franklin. Now, I feel bad for Franklin, like the entire freaking movie. You can just see his otherness affects him, and this movie is about others also. That's one thing that we dived into really heavily when we talked about this in my film class in college. It was specifically horror and psychoanalysis. It was how this movie really drives home the sense of the other and how othering parts of our society is what leads to the maniacal kind of behavior. Because the family as well, the Sawyers, they're others too. They represent parts of our society that the mainstream society, what Sally and her friends represent, push away and disregard. They stop at the cemetery to check on the grave of Sally and Franklin's grandfather, which appears undisturbed. This is also a scene where we get a look into like the dynamic of the town. There's a lot of substance abuse, mostly alcohol, poverty, and just poor living conditions. As the group drives past the slaughterhouse, Franklin recounts the Hardesty family's history with animal slaughter. And this scene also kind of gets into it. Everyone else in the van tells him to stop. And it's that like they are unable to confront the reality of their own consumption. And that's also what feeds into why the Sawyers are so successful later on in the franchise with their business, is because people are unaware of the nature of their own consumption. There's also they're reading horoscopes in the car as well. And I read into that as like the use of spiritualism on the rise as well, played into with that like severe, violent nature of just world history at that time, unfortunately. They soon pick up a hitchhiker who talks about his family who worked at the old slaughterhouse. Now, this scene also, you can kind of see like the fear in them, while of course they didn't have to stop and pull over. Kirk does, and you see their own thoughts and fears of local people that were seen as less educated or less wealthy, less healthy, whatever the case may be. Mix that with like foolishness for pulling over, the naivety of it. And an interesting conversation that comes up in Powers of Horror, I believe, Abjection. They're pretty much fine entertaining him, even though clearly something isn't right. They're fine entertaining him before that barrier of the body is broken. It's a bit of a out there maybe concept. It's a really dense concept, but Kristeva goes over it in her book about our body being a vessel and it being a barrier. And once that barrier is broken, then it forces us to come to terms with our own mortality and stuff like that. He borrows Franklin's pocket knife and cuts himself, then takes a single Polaroid picture of the group, for which he demands money. When they refuse to pay, he burns the photo and attacks Franklin with a straight razor. The group forces him out of the van, where he smears blood on the side as they drive off. As they continue on, they continue with the horoscopes, and it almost kind of foreshadows their fate a bit. Just kind of playing into it, I think, on the director's part. But I did find it interesting. They do pull up at the gas station, and they're out of gas. The gas station and them. So it's playing into that narrative of the times, I guess, where there was a gas shortage during the 70s. This is also where we see that Drayton Sawyer is the gas station owner, where it is also a barbecue place. They have barbecue, but they don't have gas. Okay. And, in hindsight, it makes you question, are they selling human meat? And it says, "We slaughter" on the sign overhead. But if you look around, there's like no land for cattle, no land for animals. There's no equipment for animals. It's just a little ringy-dingy gas station building on the side of the road. So the kids ask for directions, but they are advised not to, and they are told to just wait for gas. Who knows how long that could be. And to have some barbecue. I also thought that the absolutely brand spanking, sparkling new Coke machine at the gas station was a choice too. Everything else about it is so run down, but there's just this pristine Coke machine. Low on gas, the group stops at a gas station whose proprietor says that no fuel is available. The group explores a nearby abandoned house owned by the Hardesty family. And Franklin is telling people, kind of stories of their childhood and reminiscing with Sally. But also the group kind of ditches Franklin very quickly. And you can tell even later on for Sally kind of a bit of what of a nuisance Franklin is in some of the situations that unfortunately does play into his death. But it's very obvious kind of the mistreatment of Franklin in this film from not just the murderers, but from his own friends and family too. Continuing on with like the abject emotion of breaking the body barrier that Kristeva talks about. This is my MLA format, just tossing it up. Franklin is kind of going over in the van while they're just sitting there at the gas station waiting, talking with Kirk. He's wondering to himself what it takes for someone to do that to themselves, to cut themselves. That scene of self-mutilation is giving Franklin those abject emotions. I just thought that, like, once it happened, I was like, ooh, okay, this kind of relates to that, because they eject him once that kind of social no-no has been crossed. That also reflects to the social cues of the house. We'll get into it. But once that like social order has been broken, the ejection happens, and then they directly talk about the abject feelings that it gives Franklin. I was just like, this movie. It's pushing like art status, honestly. I believe there is an art museum that has a copy of this film. Might be the Modern Art Museum. But yeah, poor Franklin abandoned while they explore the house. The group seems to resent Franklin, and he resents them too. Kirk and Pam leave the others behind, planning to visit a nearby swimming hole mentioned by Franklin. On their way there, they discover another house, surrounded by rundown cars and run by gas-powered generators. Hoping to barter for gas, Kirk enters the house through the unlocked door, breaking a barrier once again. And it's pretty much at every point that a character breaks a social barrier, that's when something bad happens. They are then ejected or removed from the premise. You know what I mean? Or the movie. Removed altogether. As he searches the house, a large man wearing a mask made of skin appears and murders Kirk with a hammer. Great first kill. It's so unceremonious and quick that it just happens kind of out of nowhere. Very jump scare worthy as well. But Clover does talk about that as well. The nature in which all the other characters die within a slasher film. What it means for the final girl. This is also where the concept of the final girl comes from. And then we get the iconic scene with Pam where she walks in and then sees Leatherface, and he chases her out and grabs her on the porch and drags her back inside. When Pam enters the house, she stumbles into a room strewn with decaying remains and furniture made from human and animal bones. Very Ed Gein-esque. That's who we will be talking about in the Hollywood versus reality episode. Because Ed Gein is kind of like cited as being the direct inspiration for this movie. And yeah, kind of, but also not really. Very loosely based, so we'll get into that. She attempts to flee, but is caught by the man and impaled on a meat hook. The man then starts up a chainsaw, dismembering Kirk as Pam watches. And this is really power of suggestion here. It's not graphic at all. It's very violent, very just in its implied nature, but it's not visually graphic, which is not something I remembered from watching it as a little kid. Granted, of course, I've seen Texas Chainsaw since then and before I watched it again for this, but it just always kind of fascinates me going back to it. I was like, damn, the chokehold this movie had on people for so long in terms of like violence and gore. And it's not even really that bad, but the power of implication is so strong, and I love that. But Leatherface only ever loses control once the sanctity or the barrier of his home is boldly disregarded and violated by the outsiders, others, where, you know, the group of friends and the Sawyer family are both others to each other, and that's where like a major clash comes in. Even though they're both oppressed by the same system, they're held to different standards within it. In the evening, Jerry searches for Pam and Kirk. When he enters the other house, he finds Pam's nearly dead, spasming body in a chest freezer and is killed by the masked man. Another very quick, just like, dead. With darkness falling, Sally and Franklin set out to find their friends. En route, the masked man ambushes them, killing Franklin with the chainsaw.
Sally, I hear something. Stop! Stop!
A incredible jump scare. Oh my god. Probably would have fucking pissed myself in the movie theater watching this. Like, it's such a good jump scare. Now, I can't remember necessarily what movie it was. It might have been Citizen Kane. It might have been. I can't remember what movie it was specifically. But there's an older film where a bird pops up on screen and it screeches at the audience. That's one of the first considered jump scares, along with Curse of the Cat People, I believe, with the bus coming in. Those are two of the first recorded kind of jump scares in movie history. This plays into that, but it does it so freaking well. Also was done in Psycho when Norman comes running in the basement at the very end. Just incredible jump scares that work so well. The man chases Sally into the house where she finds a very old, seemingly dead man and a woman's rotting corpse. Now, I do think it is interesting that there is no maternal figure in these movies until much later on. But the missing mother is also something that kind of goes into, like, I think we talked about it a bit, maybe with Alien, the archaic mother. Kind of, though. Not really. I think it's more talking about the impact of the loss of the maternal figure. She escapes from the man by jumping through a second floor window, and she flees to the gas station. So, also, her rejecting the family's own perversions and expelling herself from the house. This is not the only time in the movie where the poor girl sends herself through a pane glass window. So that as well feels intentional, her own rejection to what she is seeing each time. So with the man in pursuit, Sally arrives at the gas station when he seems to disappear. While she is at the gas station, she also has kind of like seemingly started to unravel, but she isn't there yet. She hasn't been pushed to the point of violence and self-defense. She still is just kind of not letting things happen to her, but she has not been pushed to the mental extremity that the others have been pushed to, the others being the Sawyer family. That does come, but, and as stated in Men, Women, and Chainsaws, the final girl can only begin to fight back once she has been pushed to her absolute breaking point. But she also sees roasting meat in the gas station. That's very ambiguous. You can't really tell like what it belongs to, while the news continues playing in the background. So we're reminded of the violence and the like human on human crime. The station's proprietor comforts Sally with the offer of help, after which he beats and subdues her, loading her into his pickup truck. Now, the whole broom bashing scene is still comical to me. It just is. There's also a line of the cost of electricity, and it's just like this constant reminder of the crushing economy on this family and this town. And it just like made me question, does that in itself drive the Sawyer's sadism? Because they are very sadistic in nature, and that's something that is carried out throughout pretty much the entire franchise, is just how twisted and abnormal they are, even though it's their normal. I'm not saying it's normal, but it's their normal. So to them, we're just as other as they are to us. Now, I do think there is a very interesting conversation that is started in this first movie and not carried on later in the other installments of the franchise. And that is the possible transgendered identity of Leatherface. I know it's not talked about. It's not. But there are certain implications that some of the movies dive into, dating back to the original, that Leatherface has some sort of trans identity or a trans identity kind of imposed on them, because Leatherface very much takes over the motherly role in some of the films, and I find that interesting. Even sometimes dressed up as a woman. In this first movie, he has eyeshadow and lipstick on. I'm just saying. Another sense of otherness would be what back then would be seen as a sexual deviancy. Just saying. But if you watch the relationship of Leatherface when he's dressed up as the role of the mother And then Drayton Sawyer, it's very much giving like a relationship of domestic abuse. He treats Leatherface like he would a woman, essentially. The proprietor drives to the other house and the hitchhiker appears. The proprietor scolds him for his actions at the cemetery, identifying the hitchhiker as the grave robber. As they enter the house, the masked man reappears, dressed in women's clothing. The proprietor identifies the masked man and the hitchhiker as brothers, and the hitchhiker refers to the masked man as Leatherface. The two brothers bring the old man, Grandpa, down the stairs and cut Sally's fingers so that Grandpa can suck her blood. Sally then faints from the ordeal. That whole scene is pure and utter freaking chaos, and I believe it took them a very, very long time to film it. Insane, the things that this cast and crew had to go through to get this picture made, but it being one of the single most iconic pieces of art horror history, I mean, well, it might have been worth it. There was a scene, though, where Leatherface is explaining himself to his father, and his voice is very soft, but also primitive. And then, after explaining what happened, because the dad was mad about something and was abusing Leatherface, Leatherface started to explain. The dad calmed down, said, like, oh, okay. And then, like, you could see the cogs turning, and then he found something else to get mad about. It's just that perpetual anger and abuse cast down from generation to generation. And I think that families that stand within a certain economic place tend to experience those more. But there's also a scene where then that abuse trauma is carried from the father to the grandfather as well, because the father can't disagree to the grandfather at all. Even though the grandfather is clearly freaking incapable to do anything, his son vouches for him, says, nope, he's the best. He does it the best. Even though clearly, I think it's that pattern of abuse and violence that also then gets cast out onto the others who they see as others in their society. The next morning, Sally regains consciousness. The men taunt her and bicker with each other, resolving to kill her with a hammer. Then try to include Grandpa in the activity, but Grandpa is too weak. Sally breaks free and runs onto a road in front of the house, pursued by the brothers. An oncoming truck accidentally runs over the hitchhiker, killing him. Graphic. That's probably one of the only direct, like, very direct portrayals of violence, and it's on the villain, so I don't know. Do y'all care? The truck driver attacks Leatherface with a large wrench, causing him to fall and injure his leg with the chainsaw. Sally, covered in blood, flags down a passing pickup truck and climbs into the bed, narrowly escaping Leatherface. As the pickup drives away, Sally laughs hysterically while an enraged Leatherface swings his chainsaw in the road as the sun rises. Now, great final scene. The swinging the chainsaw around, it's just so iconic. We see the lasting effects that this is going to have on Sally. She might be getting away safe, but she isn't getting away unscathed. I mean, she just witnessed all of her friends and her brother being murdered in front of her. So it's going to have that, like, lasting effect. And that is what Clover discusses as well in Men, Women, and Chainsaws. The whole psychological journey of the final girl. And we can I don't want to like be reading directly from the books every single time, you know. I do highly recommend these books. I think they are more affordable off of Amazon. Just saying. This one was like, might have been a little more expensive. It might have been like $40 because it's kind of a little bit difficult to get your hands on. But you can buy used copies as well. I believe that's what this one was. But where Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, indicates a rise in a certain genre, the second movie, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, actually also indicates and blatantly states in its own ways that the the subgenre that it helped build up is now on the decline. So we're going to dive into that. Alrighty, yes, it is the next day. I was not going to listen to this vinyl at night. I put it on, first track started, I was like, this is terrifying. Somehow you're able to hear way more on the vinyl than you are even in the film. But we can go over the soundtrack really, really quickly before we dive into the second movie. So, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I actually got this from my local record store, so that was pretty dope. And it has the family dinner scene on the inside. It really, like, especially the opening main title sequence, it just adds to that exploitation film vibe and the grit and grime of it. It also makes it feel very real. I don't know if this will pick it up. It's kind of like a black and red, blood, nasty kind of vinyl. It really adds to the vibe of exploitation, taking true events and, you know, exploiting them for media purposes. It also makes it scarier because it feels more real. It feels set in this world and in this time period. It feels just very raw and genuine, I guess. There's a few directors that I would like to see their take on just the Sawyer family or the idea of Texas Chainsaw Massacre in general. Like, could you imagine a Rob Zombie Texas Chainsaw Massacre film? It would be so good. And him getting back together with Bill Moseley, that'd be fun. But, yeah. So with that, we have Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 pulled up. Now, this one, very different. Very different from the original. I would say that it's one of my favorite ones just because I like how campy it is. But it's very much recognizing the decline of the genre and where it headed, you know, around that time period. The campiness, I think, is a stylistic thing, but it's also very intentional. And it still carries the same message as the original, because, I mean, it is also directed by Tobe Hooper. So we know that it's like canon, you know, to the original. Still the same director, still the same people that worked on the original one. And then once it strays away from that, you can tell. There is one later on that is directed, I believe, by Kim Henkel, one of the original co-writers of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I feel like that one is much more in the same breath as the original storyline with the first and the second movie. But yeah, so just diving right on in, it was distributed by Canon Releasing. No idea who that is. The budget was 4.5 to 4.6 million, so they got quite an increase. Box office, it pulled in about 8 million. And a quick little rundown. Chainsaw-wielding maniac Leatherface is up to his cannibalistic ways once again, along with the rest of his twisted clan. This time, the masked killer has set his sights on pretty disc jockey Vanita Stretch Brock, who teams up with Texas lawmen Lefty and Right to battle the psychopath and his family deep within their lair, a macabre abandoned amusement park. Listen, if the first one is too much for you, this one I think is lighter in nature, but it's still very graphic. There's more direct portrayals of violence in this one just because of budget reasons. You know, they were able to afford more special effects, whereas the original didn't have that. But I don't know, even watching the newer installments of the franchise that came out in like the early 2000s, even those I found easier to watch than the original. And it's not like an age thing, you know, because the original holds up. It's just, it feels so much dirtier and more real and just scarier in that sense than any of the later installments do. I just find that so fascinating that one that has the least violence and the least gore in it is somehow the one that has the biggest impact. I love it, but it fascinates me. So yeah, this one came out in 1988, 80s going into 90s. This vibe of movie, the campiness of it was everywhere. I mean, you look at like Nightmare on Elm Street, even Friday the 13th started to get campy in the 80s, and then I believe that's when we start to get like a little bit later on is like Child's Play, and horror became, no, I don't want to say this in like a judgmental way, it became such a lowbrow thing, and it became seen as so lowbrow that that's where this new renaissance of horror with like A24 and production houses like them, where it's really pushing for conceptual horror, whereas we weren't getting that in the 80s. I think this is more of a commentary on that rather than, you know, just a byproduct of it, because they were leading the way in the 70s. I imagine they probably would be 80s leading into 90s as well. Like, I think they kind of saw the decline coming in. So this had not come out yet when this movie came out, but it does directly play into some of the final girl aspects that had been, or tropes that had been set up by like Alien, as well as their own setup for their final girl. And I find that to be very interesting, like the androgynous kind of aspect to Stretch. The cast, however, let's get into that. Bill Moseley plays Chop Top Sawyer. Bill Johnson plays Leatherface. Dennis Hopper is Lieutenant Lefty Enright. Jim Stedow is Drayton Sawyer. And Carolina Williams is Stretch. Now, Carolina Williams is a icon. I feel like she doesn't get enough praise. She's the whole reason that I love this movie so much, and she is the whole reason that the third Leprechaun movie is my absolute favorite. She's the best character in it. Very underappreciated, I feel like. Alright, so diving on in. So the movie opens describing the first movie's events and how Sally and Texas are haunted by these killings. Just continuing that motive that like the trauma carried on. It didn't just end once Sally was saved, but it also carries on the continuity of the story, but the realism of the story. It's like, okay, we're being thrown back into this same universe where all of these things took place, and we're going to see the kind of like societal repercussions of it. So it starts with, after the like, you know, introduction, very much kind of follows the format that the first movie created, and snippets of that and the sounds of like the camera flashings are spliced in throughout the entire series. There are always callbacks to that. So I love how, especially in the second movie, it continues the tropes that they themselves created for this franchise, but also the tropes of kind of like the horror zeitgeist at the time. It's just... So two high school seniors, Buzz and Rick, race along a desolate stretch of Texas highway en route to the Texas OU football game at the Dallas Cotton Bowl, and harass a pickup truck along the way. Heavily intoxicated, they use their car phone to call and harass on-air radio DJ Vanita Stretch Brock. Unable to convince them to hang up, Stretch is forced to keep the line open. As the two pass the same pickup truck, Leatherface emerges from the back of the truck and rips up the roof using his chainsaw. Now, this is a great scene. It's honestly terrifying, but it very quickly sets the tone that this movie is going to be very different from the original. I mean, the soundtrack, it's goofy, but it is still terrifying. I don't know why. I find someone yelling, "What is that?" And like, you're getting a very clear look at what they're seeing, but you can't really tell what it is either. That creeps into such an uncanny sense for me, and it really freaks me out. And this first scene really does that. You don't realize until quite later in what you're actually looking at. I also kind of love the continuity-ish error of like, this is the world's longest bridge. It's like you're watching them drive across this bridge for a few minutes. It's kind of crazy. But the boys even mock Stretch's name as well, which I think, just kind of plays into the very deliberate effort to give her such a specific name, a name that is kind of sexually ambiguous. But she also stands very strong with, like, I believe it's LJ. She affirms herself, like, don't call me darling, damn it. So she recognizes, like, the power that she has as a woman, and that comes in handy later on, but also kind of rejects those normal societal standards, especially for what I would say is like Deep South Texas. She just doesn't play into that at all. Rick tries shooting Leatherface with his revolver, but Leatherface kills Buzz. The car crashes, killing Rick. The following morning, Lieutenant Booty, Lefty Enright, former Texas Ranger and uncle of Sally and Franklin Hardesty, who were victims of Leatherface and his family years earlier, arrives at the scene of the crime to help solve Buzz and Rick's murders. Now, he kind of isn't really a hero. He kind of is, kind of isn't. His intentions are good, but I think he's very overzealous. And I also think that's for a reason. None of the cops, whether they're good or bad, are portrayed well in these movies. And I think that's deliberate because when you get into like these smaller towns, there is a sentiment of like anti-police. There is. And I think that kind of comes through. We're seeing a bit of a betrayal of that because it also just plays into slasher movies in general where cops are portrayed as like idiots, kind of not helpful, just bumbling around. That's how they're usually portrayed. Or they get there, you get that sense of relief, and then they're quickly killed off again. But it has that sentiment of like city versus local life, government versus people, and that starts to develop more and more also as the series continues on. There's also seems to be a very deliberate attempt for like the main police to cover up the crimes, and that also feeds into the Sawyer's own corruption, tragedy in favor of profit, because they turn around and actually become extremely successful for selling their meat and whatnot. And yeah, and we know where it all comes from. Lefty has spent the last 13 years looking into his nephew's disappearance, investigating reports of mysterious chainsaw killings across Texas. He is contacted by Stretch, who brings him a copy of the audio tape that recorded the attack. He sends her away, leaving Stretch and her coworker, L.G. Peters, to reluctantly cover a Texas/Oklahoma chili cook-off for their radio show. The winner of the cook-off happens to be Drayton Sawyer.
Whoop. One of those hard-shell peppercorns.
The current patriarch of the cannibalistic Sawyer family, who declares that his secret is having an eye for prime meat. So, like, it was heavily alluded that they were selling human flesh and whatnot in the first movie. Now it's confirmed. Meanwhile, Lefty shops for chainsaws at a local hardware store. He at first unnerves, then amuses the shop's owner with his brutal testing of the saws on a log. Such a goofy scene. It really is. It's kind of like your first instance that not everything is necessarily all right with Lefty. Like, you can tell that what happened to his own family and the fact that it's seemingly been tried to be covered up has taken a mental toll on him. Yeah, like I said, he just ends up not being much help for Stretch. We'll get into it. Also, just like, I don't know as though it's fair warning, but this movie does dive much deeper into the psychosexual relationship that Leatherface has with his victims and with his saw. Very much also feeding into the narrative or theme, I guess, of like a slasher's weapon of choice is just an extension of their male appendage, and this movie very, very clearly goes into that. But I also think it touches on like sexual repression, which is a very interesting topic in horror, and they even like it's directly stated throughout the movie. So I do find it interesting that whereas the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre seemed to be a guide for the genre, the second movie feels like more of a direct recognition of the genre and also a slight critique of it. Lefty then drives to Stretch's radio station and asks her to play the tape on her nightly radio show so that the public, which had previously mocked his case, will have to listen to him. Driving home from his chilly cook-off victory with his family, Drayton is called by Chop Top about the tape being broadcast, so he sends him and Leatherface to the radio station. While she is about to leave for the night, Stretch is confronted by Chop Top before being attacked by Leatherface. Chop Top brutally bludgeons LG with a hammer. Meanwhile, Leatherface corners Stretch and is about to kill her, but she charms him into sparing her. Now, this is a very interesting scene. It's very sexual, without it being, like, obvious. But it's also, like, kind of disturbing. It's weird. It's a weird scene. But I do find it very fascinating that the sexual frustration, it seems, that Leatherface has turned into rage and killing. But that was abandoned once that need got satisfied. I think it's a bit of a critique, but also just kind of like diving into the psychosexual nature of these like crazy killers. Because I mean, it's even discussed in like Psycho. It's obviously plays into it. And there's even a line later on where Drayton Sawyer is talking and he's like, Shax is, well, no one knows, but the saw is family. So it's very deliberate from the director and writer's standpoint. This, I don't know as though it's a critique. I think it's just getting to the bottom of what our antagonists are feeling. Leatherface returns to Chop Top and leads him to believe that he has killed Stretch. It's very much giving like when a girl doesn't let a guy hook up, but he turns around and tells all his buddies like, oh yeah, I hit that. It's very much giving that. As they take LG to their home, they are followed by Stretch, who ends up trapped inside the Sawyer's subterranean lair, located in an abandoned amusement park and decorated with human bones, multicolored lights, and carnival remnants. Now, Lefty, during this whole bit, like, you're relieved to see him, and so is Stretch, but then, like, the scene with him literally handing her a skeleton so that she can get back up, and then it obviously breaking and her tumbling down at every turn. Lefty just does not help the situation. It's deliberate, but I don't know, like, I feel for Lefty. I really do, because his heart's in the right place, you know? Whereas I don't think you get that with the other police in the series, especially when the police are the Sawyers themselves. Then it's like full-blown corruption. Lefty, who has been following their car all along, arrives equipped with chainsaws and proceeds to vandalize the lair before finding Franklin's remains. Meanwhile, Stretch is found by Leatherface, who puts LG's skinned face and hat on her before tying her arms and leaving. This movie is much more graphic than the original. It also very much seems like a reference point for the second Devil's Rejects movie. I believe it's the Devil's Rejects, because it's House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects, and then Three from Hell. So Devil's Rejects, when they're at the motel and they skin one guy's face and put it on another girl, and she runs into the road, gets hit by a truck. It feels very much referential to this, just with how it looks and everything. That's why I would love to see Rob Zombie do a Texas Chainsaw movie. One can only hope. And there's more like weird psychosexual stuff with Leatherface and Stretch. Chop Chop is even like, Leatherface, you got yourself a girlfriend?
Bubba likes her. Bubba's got a girlfriend!
Drayton scolds Leatherface when he finds out that Stretch was not killed. They torture her at the dinner table, but Lefty arrives and saves her. He does help a little bit. Stretch flees the grounds, with Chop Top chasing after her. Lefty wounds Drayton, then he and Leatherface get into a chainsaw fight, in which Leatherface is fatally wounded. The dying Drayton, accepting that he and his family have lost, takes a grenade from Nubbin's corpse and frags himself. It says that. And frags himself, Lefty, Leatherface, and Grandpa. So, everyone's dead. Canonically, doesn't feed into the rest of the series, but I guess the first two are really the only ones in the original timeline. Chop Top chases Stretch to the top of a stone tower in the amusement park. Stretch grabs a chainsaw from the corpse of the family's grandmother in a shrine and fatally wounds Chop Top. Now, causing him to fall off the tower to his death. Now, I do find it interesting that we once again get a portrayal of the grandmother, but once Stretch disturbs her corpse, then Chop Top is like, you killed Grandma! I found that interesting as well. Like, the act of defiling her corpse, for them was fine, but someone else doing it now solidifies that she is actually gone. Stretch shouts in triumph and swings the chainsaw in the air, her physical movements echoing Leatherface's chainsaw dance from the closing scene of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Very obviously referential, but I love it that, like, reclaiming of power from Stretch seems like vindication for all of the other victims. But yeah, we can look into this one. Now, this one's much more illustrated, and the music overall in general is a very different vibe. Once again, I think this is kind of like the recognition that the era is over and horror slashers are not what they once were. At least in the eyes of the director. But it is very illustrated. I do love it. And it's got a much more upbeat tempo. The scene from the bridge. Like, it's just so cool. It's cool. And it is also on, like, red splattered silver gray. I don't know what you would consider that. Some places call it silver. I think it's gray. But yeah, so that's that one, guys. And with that, let's go on to the third. Well, hello, big baby. Hello. Hi, sleepyhead. Alrighty, so we are now going to dive into the third installment, and this is the last one for this video. We're probably going to go through it rather quickly because this one, usually I am a fan of third installments, and I do think there are some interesting parts in this one, but it's not the same director, not the same writers, not even the same production company. It feels very, very different. So this one is called Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, 1990. Now there is another Leatherface later on. We'll get to that. This one is directed by Jeff Bird, distributed by New Line Cinema, and the box office, it made $5.8 million. So, quick little premise is driving through Texas, young yuppie couple, Michelle and Ryan, stop at the Last Chance gas station. But after they witness the owner attacking a hitchhiker named Tex, they panic and flee. In their hasty departure, they get lost and soon find themselves pursued by the chainsaw-toting maniac, Leatherface. So, the cast for this movie are A. Mihailoff plays Leatherface, Kate Hodge plays Michelle, William Butler plays Ryan, Viggo Mortensen plays Eddie Sawyer, Ken Foree plays Benny, and Caroline Williams is the reporter. So she gets a fun, quick little cameo. We get to see her again, which is always nice. So again, with the description of the young couple being yuppies, it brings in, again, that theme of like the social divide between classes or city versus rural life. But I also think that the family is like starting to adapt to that too, because not to spoil anything, but Tex is a member of the Sawyer family as well. But he's very handsome, he's very charming, but he's able to gain the trust of them a lot quicker than like who they see as less civilized people. But they're using that to their advantage now, having like a more charming one. I'm gonna be honest, my favorite installment of like that character in this series is the one with Matthew McConaughey. That might be one of my favorites overall between the first two and then that one. It's so good. It's good. Just give it a chance. Renee Zellweger is in it also. The opening sequence in this one is very different, but also very much similar. We're getting to see Leatherface making a mask, and it's very graphic. After a chase, Leatherface kills a young woman, Gina, and cuts off her face to make it into a mask, while Gina's sister, Sarah, watches from a nearby window. That's just like the opening sequence. Sometime later, a couple traveling through Texas, Michelle and Ryan, reach the Last Chance gas station, where they meet a hitchhiker named Tex and the station's owner, Alfredo. A fight soon breaks out between Tex and Alfredo when Tex finds Alfredo spying on Michelle as she uses the station restroom. Alfredo becomes defensive, and as Michelle and Ryan flee in their car, they witness Alfredo apparently killing Tex with a shotgun. When Ryan and Michelle become lost, the driver of a large truck throws a dead coyote at their windshield. Now, I do think the scene of like the creepy rundown truck following them in the dark was really good. There are some great scenes and sequences in this movie, but altogether, it just feels so separated from the franchise. And even some of the movies that come after it feel more connected to the original than this one. It's just such a random one-off for me. As Ryan changes the car's flat tire, Leatherface appears and ambushes them, but they manage to drive off unscathed. After Michelle, Ryan, and another driver, a survivalist named Benny. Now, we love Benny. Benny is a great character. A survivalist named Benny crash when a bloodied Tex leaps in front of the car. Michelle, Ryan, and Benny decide to find Tex. On the way, Benny discovers a hook-hand man named Tinker, who offers his assistance in setting down road flares. Benny soon realizes Tinker's real intentions after he finds a damaged chainsaw in the back of his truck. He flees and encounters Leatherface, but is saved by Sarah, who had earlier escaped Leatherface. It's a bit of a mess. It's all like in a swamp too. It's kind of giving low budget. Just a bit. Benny learns that Sarah's entire family was killed, and that Leatherface and his family are watching the roads. Benny hears Michelle and Ryan calling for him and leaves Sarah. Leatherface kills her with his chainsaw a short time later. Leatherface then attacks Michelle and Ryan, capturing the latter when he gets caught in a bear trap. Now, there is going to be some introduction of some newer characters into the Sawyer family that I do find interesting. It's the first time that we get any kind of maternal figure, and also just any female in the family. There's a little girl in this one. Also, that's kind of terrifying just to think of like the implications of that. Escaping, Michelle locates a house and is captured by Tex, revealed to be one of the Sawyers, who brings her into the kitchen and introduces her to the already deceased and decomposed grandma, as well as Annie and the little girl. Tinker then drags in the badly injured Ryan, whom he and Tex suspend upside down with a pair of meat hooks. When Leatherface returns home, Tex equips him with a large golden chainsaw with the words, "The saw is family," engraved on it.
Hey, Junior! Got something special for you. Hank did it. Chrome's every damn thing.
Now, I do find that also a very interesting escalation from the second movie, where the saw was just an extension of Leatherface's sexual frustration. Now, it's directly an extension of his family, kind of like completely overriding that sexual urge or sexual desire that might have been pushing Leatherface to kill. There's also a very interesting scene where one of the brothers is literally driven to kill because he's frustrated seeing Leatherface receive love from a female figure. In the woods, Benny finds Alfredo and apparently kills him. As the family prepares for dinner in the kitchen, the little girl kills Ryan. Leatherface prepares to kill Michelle as well, but Benny opens fire on the house with a semi-automatic rifle, killing Annie and presumably Tinker. I also found it very interesting that the son, I believe it's Tex even, wears his mom's apron when in the kitchen, assuming like the mother role of the family. But the mother figure also talks about castrating men of the family, and the castrating mother actually is referenced in The Monstrous Feminine by Barbara Creed, which is also like foundational text for this kind of psychology going into art analysis, horror analysis specifically. It's a kind of out there idea to express in a YouTube video, so I'm not going to dive into it super deep, but it's the idea that a mother mentally castrates the child so that they won't grow and kind of like separate themselves from the mother. That's the best way that I can put it. In this case, it's actual castration. Now, I will say this movie does have a lot of misogynistic undertones and a lot of classist undertones as well. I mean, the others do too, but this one, I would say it's very blatantly obvious.
What are the chances of a brainless bitch like you know how you did it?
Pretty goddamn good, you backwoods motherfucker.
I would also say it's harder to just like see. I'm not sure why the third one impacted me more, but it seems like Tobe Hooper was very aware of that, pushed away from that, and yet when it comes to this one, it's very different. It's very, very different. And maybe it just feels that way also because you hear how they talk about women and then you relate that to the women in their own family, and it feels so weird. But then, I mean, the heroes of the story are very classist to the villains as well. So, like, it's a toss-up. It's also 90s. The 90s weren't necessarily the most progressive time period. Michelle escapes and flees to the woods, pursued by Leatherface, while Benny kills Tex. Benny rushes to Michelle's aid, but Leatherface apparently kills him. In revenge, I feel like they're saying apparently a lot because there's a lot of off-screen shit in this movie, which I think also does not help it. In revenge, Michelle apparently kills Leatherface. As dawn breaks, Michelle reaches the main road before Alfredo's pickup truck, driven by a surviving Benny, stops in front of her. As Benny helps her into the truck, Alfredo appears and attacks him. Benny avoids Alfredo's attacks and Michelle kills Alfredo before the pair drive away, unaware that a surviving Leatherface is revving his chainsaw some distance away. So, they didn't. It's a lot of like, ooh, did he get him? Did he not? There you go. There is a moment in the very beginning where they hit an armadillo, I think, and Michelle says that, like, oh no, I'll be the one to do it. Once Ryan offers to put it out of its misery, she said, I did this, I need to take care of it. And then she can't. That sentiment is very quickly kind of done away with after she goes through everything that she goes through in the night. You know, where she is, who she is by the end of the film is a completely different person. Now she can kill a man without second thought, whereas before she couldn't even put an armadillo out of its misery. So yeah, I know I'm a little more critical of this one. I think in the grand scheme of all of the films together, it's a nice, like, pace setter, because it's not like the others. And I think that's a good thing, and I think that also kind of works against it a bit. I don't know. I want to know your thoughts, guys, because the third one is an interesting one, and I'm usually a fan of the third movie. You know, I love Halloween 3, love Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Scream 3, even Friday the 13th, the third part, is one of my favorites because I think it's the scariest. So, like, there's just something about the third movie in a series that I just love. But this one, I don't know. It's got a very different vibe. Like I said, I really love the one with Matthew McConaughey. We'll get into that, though. I think that's the next one, I believe. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning on in, guys. Like I said, I want to know your thoughts. I know this series is a little out there. It's a little much. I get that. Like I said in the very beginning of the video, I think we remember it being a lot more violent and gory than it actually was. So I would maybe test some of y'all to just revisit the original. Why not? Give it a shot. Or the second one. I think they're both great. I believe you can find them both on Tubi, Tubi, completely free. There are ads, but it's not that bad. But yeah, thank you so much, you guys. Let me know what you thought about this video, what you thought about the movies. Like and subscribe, all of that. Gooby and I thank you for tuning on in, and we will catch you guys in the next one. Take care.